And our speaker today is Nora Moore, whom Claire and I met for the first time about 2 years ago on one of our trips over, our only trip over to Lakeport. And people often ask, well, what's going on with the whole Kelseyville thing? Because the name change that they're working on there has many similarities and differences to our own effort here. They are trying to change the name that was applied from a murderer, as we are, Braxton Bragg, who was a traitor and an enslaver. The big difference, of course, is that they are an unincorporated town. We are an incorporated city, and Nora will talk more about how that impacts what they're doing. But in terms of our activities, we equally, with the group in Lakeport, which is called Citizens for Healing, are committed to education and raising consciousness around this history. Nora has been a Lake County resident since the Valley Fire in 2015. She's worked in housing as a manager and real estate sales agent throughout her time in the community. In 2023, she joined Citizens for Healing, where she contributes to efforts focused on community restoration and equity by digital and social online support. In addition to making short videos for Citizens for Healing, she did one for us here, and you can find those online, and they're a lot of fun. Take a look at them, quite short. Nora is deeply committed to supporting those who have been historically and currently oppressed, and is dedicated to advancing meaningful change, repair, and prevention of further harm. Citizens for Healing has been waging a campaign to end the town name of Kelseyville, named for murderer and sex trafficker Andrew Kelsey, and to apply the indigenous name Konocti in its place. So it's really a pleasure to have Nora Moore here with us this afternoon.
Thank you. Notes going there. Thank you for having me this afternoon. It was a gorgeous drive out here. We were out, I think, for around the New Year to Point Arena. It's just a very beautiful drive. It's a gorgeous place. The flora and the fauna are amazing. And that brings me to the idea that it's so difficult to see these beautiful places in Northern California. And whether you've grown up here or you're an implant here from another state, it's so strikingly beautiful that it's hard to believe some of the histories that have gone on in these locations and what it took to build up the civilizations that are here now. Where it concerns Kelseyville, I'll tell you my start, like Philip said, I moved to Lake County in about 2015 for an opportunity to work at a location that actually burned down in the Valley Fire. So I changed my direction and went to just housing, apartment housing, real estate, and now I help with seniors in manufactured housing. So what brought me to this group, Citizens for Healing, in 2023, there was an open invitation to from Scotts Valley to come and hear from them about changing the name. And now this is in 2023, we're still coming out very hot from 2020 with COVID, with George Floyd, a lot of very high racial tensions, a lot of need to repair a lot of things that had been either covered up or were currently being enacted and seem to be within a pattern. So there was a very big push in those 3 years since that time to make things right. A lot of names were changed, including Fort Bragg in North Carolina, right? And that was what seemed like an easy change, even though it had pushback. That was about a $6 million change on a government entity that was very clear and obvious to those in charge of whatever it was during that administration. So those things tend to kind of steamrolled things and get interest in other, what's our town name, what's going on with us. And in concern with Kelseyville, when I went to this meeting with the Scotts Valley, I thought I was going to learn history and just kind of get a timeline, and what I got were memories. And that's a whole different thing than going to a history class, because I'm listening to elders who have sat with their grandparents who went through the subjugation, through the slavery, the forced labor, and the absolute atrocities that happened to their actual family members, and the stories that they told them that live in their blood. So it was a very different feeling than feeling like I learned more about the history of the place that I came to feeling like I didn't know enough about where I had come, and what I needed to feel like I wasn't another imposer in a land taking advantage of an economic boon that was brought on the backs of a Native population that was still struggling to get back to the equality that we kind of wish for everybody. So after that, I actually went to the POMA individuals, because they were doing video interviews, and I said, can I help you edit that? Is there some way I can use my skills in social media and video editing to help you? And they said, you know what, there's actually a group that could probably really use your help. And I think that enabled me to get a hold of Lorna, who works with Citizens for Healing. Now, they started in 2020, and they put their petition into the BGN, which is the Bureau of Geographic Names. Because Kelseyville is not incorporated or it's an actual town, this can be changed by a petition and an organization, or the government organization that changes geographical names. So it literally could be done against the individual's wishes, much like Fort Bragg was changed in North Carolina, and we would have to deal with it. So we have that petition, and it's one of the oldest petitions BGM still currently has on their docket, and they keep moving us forward to where we will be heard on January 26th again, and hopefully we'll have another step. But what's occurred since that petition has been an interesting mode of education. And what we've seen by holding Citizens for Healing has hold talks much like Scotts Valley, where you just have an open forum and a period of time where you talk, and much like this, somebody speaks about their experience and they get questions and answers, and you get to kind of hang out afterwards. So Citizens for Healing was doing this at the local park at Kelseyville. And I think what the difference is, and like Philip had said, this is named Kelseyville, it's named after a murder. The interesting story is it's actually named after a group of murders. The individual that started Vallejo in about 1840s was cattle ranching, and he was pretty brutal to the natives, to the point that they drove him out, and he left his cattle to Stone and Kelsey, who came and subjugated the natives even further. And one of the most horrifying stories involves the women of the tribe having to watch their sons and their uncles and their husbands and their fathers go to a mining camp with the Kelsey brothers and not return, because those brothers sold the supplies and left those men at those camps to starve and die. And so the mothers didn't see their sons come back, and then to have their daughters then taken and raped by these individuals. There was a point where those two men took another group of men with them and left one of the brothers here, and the natives and Stone, the natives took their revenge on those two brothers. So when Ben Kelsey returned and his brother Andrew Kelsey and Stone were killed, he actually went to the government and got the marshals to come out and drive the remaining women and children and elderly who they could not abandon at Golden Mines to what we now call Bloody Island, where they refused to even fire their guns because they were such not a threat. They didn't want to waste bullets, and they murdered the women and children on the island, and only one little girl, 5 or 6 years old, survived by breathing through a reed in the water. And that was a state-sanctioned genocide of one of the Pomo tribes in our county that only sits on a rock on a memorial. And that area was named after Kelsey. It had multiple iterations from Kelsey Town that ended up being declared in 1947, I believe, or maybe it was 57, to be Kelseyville. So it's very clearly named after those individuals that led a chain of atrocities against our local tribes. And it's very difficult to hear, and so much so that those who oppose the name will not deny that those are atrocities that were undeserved by any people. It was worse than just driving people off of their land. It was utilizing them to build your society and then murdering, taking their weapons of being able to survive themselves and relegating them to the land that maybe was promised more so and given less. So there's been multiple attempts to make things right without actually making the forward progress, and the tribes in our area are extremely resilient, and all 7 of our tribes support this change, and they have petitioned the National I want to say Congress of Natives. There's this NCAIS, and they too support our tribes in the change from Kelseyville to Konocti, which is a very local name that everybody's very familiar with. It's not spelled in the way that originally it was introduced to the language with our Pomo languages, but it is a name that has been used for the mountain, our volcanic mountain there. And it's something that we had hoped would help ease the transition from something that was difficult to pronounce or unfamiliar to the populations, because a lot of our pushback is that there are families in our area who've been there for 200 years, very likely might have come in very directly after Kelsey and taken advantage of the peace that was given by the savagery that was visited on the native people and built a community there, a very fruitful. They have a pear festival every year. They're a very close-knit community. I try to come out and do those things with them, and we do a good at the picnic there we have a Earth Day that we do at the park there, and there's very beautiful features. So when you have a pushback of a shorter history against a longer history that's been visited on atrocities, there's a sensitivity that you want to bring in both those histories. And it's been difficult to weave those things together without getting emotional, very much so online, but also at board meetings. It's been very much heated between the two parties, and to be able to educate, which this will lead me into Measure U. So it's gotten so heated that our board actually put a measure to vote, and the question was, do you find the name Kelseyville, given the atrocities, and it kind of gave a short list, to be offensive? And we saw around a 70% say no and a 30% say yes, and many took that as a victory for the lack of interest in the change in name. But very likely, if we had held that vote in 2020, we would have seen a lot more no's because of the lack of education. And so I want to congratulate Citizens for Healing for that 30%, because that means the talks that they held and the information that we've been able to get out has at least gotten those 30% to consider enough to mark a yes. I think that's offensive, and the change would definitely be worth it for us to see happen. And I think there's a lot of positives that can come out of that. There's, of course, costs that are mentioned, and I don't think that comes from an uneducation of what it would mean for our area. I'm not sure about Fort Bragg, being that it is an incorporated city, but we would almost layer Konocti with Kelseyville until it kind of faded. Those that wanted to use it would fade away. It'd be the same zip code. Businesses that had Kelseyville could remain in their name. They could even write Kelseyville into their mail and it would still get to their home. So there's a misunderstanding of the costs. We think those will be a lot less and would bring in better tourism if we were able to say us as a community was able to make that change and see our history and want to move forward, not by covering it up, by acknowledging it, by honoring the strength of the people who are still here and pairing our strength with the drive to have a peaceful future for our children, for our grandchildren, everybody who's been here, and moving forward with what we've kind of been handed through our history. So I look forward to just even more talks like this, bringing more change in the numbers that we see as voting. And as much as we'd like to see instant change, I know that the long arc of justice and morality, just seeing those little numbers go up is definitely fulfilling. So I look forward to seeing how more educational talks like this, if we do have movements and measures, how that will go. And I, of course, look forward to June 26th when we go up against in the BGN. And there's no one to go up against. We're just petitioning them, and they've welcomed letters, and they've heard from our tribes. So it's just up to their decision, and we hope that they see that as a good step forward. And if they don't, we will continue. We'll petition with another name if necessary. It's mostly about education and awareness, and in that, I think we've definitely got our goal just by what we've seen in the measure. So if there's questions.
Questions, response?
Yes.
Share the mic with you.
That it lives in their blood. I had never heard that before, and I love that phrase because I think it applies in so many ways to maybe all of us, and especially people who have been harmed through the centuries, that yes, it lives in their blood.
No, and it's a science. Epigenetic trauma throughout generations is literally a science in which they're seeing these types of behaviors, and we've seen it in traumatized and captured animal groups that their offspring will exhibit the same type of defensive measures because it's in our blood. It's literally, so for, I think, and that's kind of interesting where many natives have the 7 generations. You want to protect those 7 generations. They're finding that it takes 7 generations to get that trauma out. So we've got a long run to kind of clear that and for everybody to deal with that trauma as people who didn't enact it but are still either benefit from it or finding that there's still a detriment even into how they react and behave to things. It's quite a study we're seeing now.
You mentioned a very scientific term, but it's so simple to understand. It lives in their blood. It lives in our blood.
Yep, generational trauma.
Joe?
You said it takes 7 generations to disappear.
I think it was to release the particular trauma that one generation, and I'm thinking more in animal studies because it's easier to see those generations, right? As to where a behavior is no longer exhibited naturally or innately without the stimuli that the original generation. It was done with like a blinking light in a food source, and then the next generation, when that light blinked, they reacted as if they had been trained the same way. And so without that blinking light and type of stimulation, it took about 7 generations from not to have that same reaction.
My gut is that it doesn't disappear until white people stop doing what they're doing right now.
Well, and that's there, and that's we had that talk at lunch. Is we're seeing a lot of the same type of attacks, although not quite as blatant, in our voting systems and things that are going on to minimize voices, to minimize the impact of our votes. And like I told Philip, I feel like this is an extinction burst, and much like the cars we had when we were little, sometimes you have to pull them back to build that kinetic energy. And with this youth we have in this Generation Z and the power that they have with the double-edged sword between, they can be real dark and edgy to where they can enact immediate change. We're seeing it around the world that Gen Z is able to flip whole governments at sometimes and then reinstitute parliaments through their technology. So I think that there's a push to go with the old ways of trying to subjugate and push down those voices. But I think that's only going to energize this generation who has a better idea of what history has created and is going to react to it. So I feel you on that there's definite a revisitation of what people thought was gone, and it's back.
Yeah, well, it's never been gone. It's always been here. It's never been.
You and I know that for sure.
It still is.
No, and like I said, I have big hopes for this Gen Z to push us over the edge to where we're no longer kind of secretly harboring an affection for a system that really served no one.
I'm sorry, can you give me a age frame for Gen Z?
An H frame?
Age
Age range, Gen Z, they're coming into adulthood to, let's see, they started about 2000, so they're hitting 25, I think that's about 2005 or so. So you're 16 to 25-year-olds right now. So they're voting, they're getting their first job, they're coming out of college and finding it difficult to find their first job with a load of debt on their back because they were told that they needed to come to college. Some of them are going into trades. I'm seeing a lot of them seeing the disillusion of the millennials who are now in your 35s, and having children in school, and they're going into more of the trade schools. My son wants to be a welder, so we're looking at unions and things like that. So they're learning to step back and see what their grandparents, stumbles are and what their parents' stresses are, and either they're seeing that they have not a whole lot of hope because the economics of today, or they're seeing that they need to put their passion if they're going to see that to be, a future for them. And I'm seeing both sides, and that pendulum is definitely powerful and passionate. Anyone else?
I always have something. Don't go away. I just following the story of Konocti, Kelseyville, over the last, really it's been 6 years now, six years of struggle. How would you say, what I really appreciate from your talk is your optimism. And I wonder if but you're working in Konocti with a bunch of older people as well. What keeps people going when it's so hard sometimes to see progress?
I think it's a lot of community. We are a pretty big bag because you do have individuals who've been there for 200 years. You do have our native individuals who've been there for 14 to 10,000 years. But we have a lot of influx, especially after COVID, of individuals from the Bay Area. Because working from home was made so much easier, they were able to take their larger salaries, and I sold quite a few of them homes that they could work home. So you have a lot of what they're calling outsiders. You have a lot of liberals, left-leaning individuals from the Bay Area that have more of a diverse background and less of a kind of more narrow-minded mindsets and less of an attachment to the history. So when we're doing events, we're focusing on music and community, and while we're doing that and having food and barbecue, Clayton will come and talk. Another individual from the native community will come and talk, and my group, Citizens from Healing, has a historian. We have individuals who've been in the community. So the wealth of experience in building that community, I think, is what will be most attractive, is that we're having fun, that we're able to, discuss things about the history and yet still have a good time as a diverse community and plan for our future. But boy, like you said, sometimes things get heated online, and that creates camaraderie. Very often we come out to defend each other and make sure that the points aren't misunderstood, make sure misinformation isn't being spread. And so there's a need for that opposition so that you know what people's questions in their mind are. And of course, they're going to be loud, and I've had my safety was not guaranteed, which is a really roundabout way of making sure I feel unsafe. I've had bumper stickers slapped on my car at my work just to let me know that the Save Kelseyville group knows where I live and knows where I work, because it's usually the same place because I do property management. So there's a very much a spicy tinge to the opposition that has made itself presently aware, like physically, and that's only kind of given me the realization that the group I support needs more support. Being bullied is not okay, And the best way to combat that is to gain allies through education and spreading our message. So that's why I think making that processable in videos and ways that people, we have Instagram, we have TikTok, I've got us on Facebook pages, just to get out the story. And as I do that, more people are connecting and bringing me their stories. I've seen quite a few youth that have made documentaries about the Pomo, and I've shared theirs on our pages. So as we connect and create community, I think that will, of course, invite opposition, but that gives us something, that community to do, to answer, to look organized when we have those things and can bring it together.
Sandy?
Yeah, a couple of things. You mentioned Clayton Duncan. I know him a little bit, and I believe it was his grandmother that survived what he got. And there's a memorial service, like a sunrise service. Do you know when that is?
I've been invited, and like I said, we have 7 tribes around the lake, so they all have different ceremonies. The one on the sunrise service is not so much on the island, that's owned privately currently, but it is on the coast looking at the island. I'm pretty sure it's been in the last 2 weeks or a week. Lorna, I believe, goes to it, kind of the leader of Citizens for Healing, but I have not attended as of yet. In fact, I posted last year and had the private owner of, I mistook the event as occurring on the island and had the private owner contact me to make sure that I corrected that information, which was great because I was able to get her in contact with the tribe because she was thinking about selling it at the time. So sometimes when we make mistakes and are able to answer them, that can bring up some good connections.
And related to that, I mean, I think it would be helpful if some of us here in Noyo went to some of your events over the
Absolutely, and I think Philip's in, yeah, I agree. Philip's in our mailing list. Anyone's welcome to get on our mailing list. It's citizensforhealing.org. And anywhere on there, it's all the information I've talked about with a lot more detail and dates and sources. We've got, like I said, we've got a historian who does our website, so he's got sources for everything that we have. The mailing list will keep us up to date on that, and I believe Lorna posts every year as to when that would occur. So I believe I saw her posting about that, but it is welcome after a certain period of time to the public.
And they're very aware of what we're doing here, and they are really supportive of the idea of sharing our stories. So we'd be very welcome. And of course, Clayton has spoken here. It was about 1.5 years ago. What happens? The name change goes to the Bureau on Geographic Names. And I would imagine, given who's in the White House, that they're going to be very reticent about making a change that might draw federal attention. I mean, Trump could just fire them all and appoint a new board. So what happens if they say no to the name change?
Well, they can't stop us from putting in another petition. I think if anything, this has been a learning experience in how the public would react, how the government organizations function, and how a current administration can influence even the people that we don't know, but it's definitely seemed to slow down. It almost seemed like they pushed us out of dockets around election time to avoid making decisions for that. So when that election went through, our hearts sank because many of the letters in opposition were also sent to the administration thinking that he would do something like that, because it's not outrageous for him to just kind of flippantly decide and focus on some type of community. Hopefully he's highly distracted with global issues. But if that were something that we would just keep educating, we would continue to petition.
It would go on.
Absolutely, we would continue to petition, and I think we're only a few short generations from people who will gladly pass that through, whether their grandfather owned a store there or not.
And I think it's significant, and you didn't mention that the Bureau of Geographic Names asked for the input of the Board of Supervisors, who voted 3-2 in favor of the name change.
And that's something I forgot to mention when I mentioned Measure U, is for sure everybody thought that the 70% saying no meant that was it, the issue was over, the majority has spoken. But the board actually did continue to hear, after the vote, continued to hear from people. And it was a very tight vote, and someone actually flipped at the end and decided that 30% is a significant, that's 1 out of 4 people in our county thought the name was offensive. That's a pretty big thing. Like, nobody looks at Ford and thinks, oh, 1 in 4 people think Ford is offensive. It was a big deal for that. And so the Board of Supervisors did decide, I think it was 3-1, to recommend the name, and they sent a letter to the BGN supporting it as the Board of Supervisors. So that kind of bubbled up a lot of misunderstanding on what that vote meant, and it leans to, and I'm not a big fan of Thomas Jefferson given his history, but he has a quote talking about how the majority has a responsibility to also morality and not to continually oppress the minority, which since his time has still occurred. But it's a good point that even though you have a majority vote, you still have a responsibility to maintain morality. And that's what we've always said about this. Is not a political thing. This is a moral thing. And with Cesar Chavez developments and how quickly the state of California has moved to make those removals, and I think his victims were much less numerable than the ones we have between Fort Bragg and Kelsey. The hope is that we do have a renewed strength in making those changes immediately, and as well as some of the developments in what our government has been hiding. We're finding that we're still dealing with predators, and I'd like to hope that we want to send a message that that's not tolerated in our past to be honored, and it shouldn't be tolerated in our present, in our homes, in our government currently. And some of those ways to do that is to have these talks, make these education, make our voice known, that we see you in the past and we see you right now, and we won't let it happen in the future.
And we know that, thank you. And we know, talking about sexual predators and sex trafficking, we know that the Mendocino Indian Reservation was referred to as the U.S. brothel because of the sex trafficking of young Native boys and girls from the reservation. And of course, if Braxton Bragg, who had 105 enslaved people on his sugar plantation in Louisiana, we know that just as commonly, sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, and rape were a reality of plantation life. I'm always surprised when I'm reading about Braxton Bragg. It says that he was a Louisiana planter. That's all. It says nothing about slavery. And it sounds so nice to be a Louisiana planter. You might actually aspire to that until you start asking what it actually meant in 1854. Sandy, you had another question?
A couple of things. So this Bureau of Name Change, that's a federal agency?
It's the Bureau of Geographical Names. So when something's not an actual incorporated town, say it's a creek, it's a geographical type of thing, that's what, for some reason, Kelseyville has always been, is a post office butted up to a mountain that they call Kelseyville, and it sprouted from there. So the incorporation of it seems to be null and void in the future. It's just how it is. So since it's not incorporated, the Bureau can just change that name, and we'll just deal with it. So they could literally do it overnight.
Federally, I don't know where Jared Huffman's district borders are, but I'm guessing he's the congressperson for most of Lake County. I don't know that.
I think ours is
Mike Thompson?
Mike Thompson,
Yeah, I
and
think
he's
so.
actually come to our meetings, I believe. So I couldn't say if he's in support. I know he's had some land acknowledgements that he supported, but I can't say if he really leans one way or the other. But I think our group has discussed things with them, but it's literally out of the local hands as well. We've been from all areas that Citizens for Healing looked before the petition. it all pointed to BG is the group that would change the name.
Is it helpful, you were saying there's a decision happening on the 26th?
June 26th, they're going to have a meeting with their whole docket and agenda, and we're on it.
So would it help if some of us sent letters?
Absolutely, and if you get onto the citizensforhealing.org site, there is a letter mailing campaign or a way to easily fill out an email, where to send it, and I think we can always keep sending opinions and our own push and passion for it. Absolutely.
Just to parallel our situation here, as an incorporated city, the issue of whether to change the name or not will be decided by all the registered voters living within city limits. And that's only 3,900 people. In the last presidential election, only 2,900 people voted, which means we're probably looking at 1,500 people who would agree to a name change. So it's a very possible goal. And I'm hoping, I'm kind of curious to see how the midterms go in November. And if, as I'm hoping, there's a vast repudiation of the Trump administration, then I would think that we might think about a ballot initiative in 2028.
That's exciting.
It is.
Right?
Could be, yeah.
And very
if we
doable.
lose, we only have to wait 2 years till we try again.
Right? And we will keep trying.
Anybody else? All right. Well, I want to thank Nora Moore very much for coming and being our speaker today, and also support her in all the work that she's doing over in Lake County. And we'll continue to communicate and share what I hope are going to be future successes.
Absolutely, and please do visit the website and sign up for the mailing list. I'll encourage Lorna to set up some, we need more teach-ins. I think we kind of lulled. There was definite, like I said, a drop in the heart with the administration to where you don't want to be the peg that stands out too much. But we want to do the teach-ins, we want to do the meetings, and we love for outsiders to come support and learn the history, because this is the history of humanity and we're all earthlings and we should all know it and move forward with it.
Very good. Thank you.